A Colonel's Dream. Baie Comeau. On the north shore of the St. Lawrence River, a young city, a symbol of prosperity emerging from the Great Depression of the 1930s. Even today, this industrial center exists for and by industry, the aluminum industry, but above all the paper industry, which gave birth to a city that experienced a meteoric rise unlike any other. A model city, a company town, as they used to say, but above all, the project of one man, Colonel Robert Rutherford McCormick, publisher of the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the Chicago newspaper. He was portrayed as an adventurer, which he undoubtedly was in his own way. But even though the colonel enjoyed paddling the turbulent rivers of the North Shore, he was first and foremost a financier, a seasoned capitalist in his field. He leaves behind a city, Baie Comeau, whose history is unique in many respects. You've probably already heard about Baie Comeau's history in school or class. But who was this man? The founder of Baie Comeau. What did he do for a living? What was he? A journalist? The history of Baie Comeau begins on the French battlefields during the First World War. Publisher of one of the most prominent daily newspapers in the United States, Colonel Robert McCormick is completing his service. Despite the horrors of war, his thoughts turn to the business that awaits him in America. The Chicago Tribune owns a newsprint mill on the Canadian side of the canal. Its Canadian subsidiary, the Ontario Paper Company, needs a sustained and ever-increasing supply of wood as the newspaper's circulation continues to grow. This led to the founding in 1919 of the Daily News, which would become the New York Times, one of the first tabloids. This leads the owners of the Tribune to seek new sources of timber, but they take a swipe at the North Shore. It is there that they will find the resources necessary to satisfy the growing appetite of American printing presses. The first forest that managed to buy timber for its mill, even before the Baie Comeau mill was built, was the forest of the town at the Rock, which would build a town that is now called Beauquartier, which was called Beauquartier before. It's the old folks from Baie Comeau, dear B. Okay, let's forget about that on the page. Then, after that, he bought Franklin in addition to the Shelter B concession, the site of the future city of Port Cartier. In 1923, the Ontario Paper Company acquired the rights to vast territories along the Franklin River. Along the Manicouagan River, the lease granted by the government came with a significant condition: the construction of a pulp mill on the Manicouagan or Outades River basins. The colonel's men began by building a dam on the Outades River, a dam whose energy source was uncertain. But he decided to build it at the smaller, easier-to-develop site, which was the first dam he created. He started building one, which, because of this, had no other choice, and it had to be built by the English. Then, a phenomenon occurred. Then we find a factory in Quebec, an overproduction of paper. The price collapses. There are a bunch of towns in the Saguenay and Gaspé regions that are getting into this, no doubt about it. If you buy other mills, you'll get more paper. But the government is the same. It's going to be a given, considering the ever-increasing needs, the advantageous conditions on cutting rights, and the newsprint prices, which they can only raise. The colonel now has other plans. Ontario can't keep up and won't just build a simple pulp mill. They're announcing the construction of a real newsprint mill, capable of producing up to 120 tons per year to satisfy the needs of the New York of news. What's more, they intend to create a truly modern city on this arid coast. The Baie Comeau project is launched because it's a press company. for international purposes, but practically, they hired an excellent Hollywood film company that came to make a film for the creation of Baie Comeau. It starts off absolutely beautifully. There are about 10 industry barons around a table, all saying, well, we're going to spend $15 million to build, when the scenario is really beautiful. So we see it. God, shaping a city out of granite. Many believe that McCormick will go all out, driven by the desire to work at the height of the crisis. People flock from all over Quebec. The Baie Comeau construction site will be buzzing with activity, interrupted for years. Construction work resumes on the power plant on the Rivière aux Outardes, about 20 kilometers west of the site of the future city. The most gigantic serpent of wood and steel will stretch for nearly 2 kilometers, through which water will flow to the turbines made of Colombian loaf, 17 feet in diameter. It was the largest water pipeline in the world at the time. In addition to the plant, the power station had to meet the electricity needs of an entire community. That's 2,000 to 3,000 employees. That, in the midst of an economic crisis, really made an impression. That's the bay. While the logging crews prepared the land, surveyors cut and laid out streets in what was still just a landscape of forest and rock. The plan includes houses for administrators, residential areas for employees, a shopping center, a hospital, and an area reserved for school and religious facilities. The factory occupies the bottom of the bay on a former marsh that had to be irrigated. Meanwhile, the town itself is to be built on the slopes of a mountain called Mount 5. The whole project would prove to be one of the largest construction programs in Canada. In the time of the land of Cain, nestled in a bay that would be named after a son of the coast, the naturalist Napoleon Alexandre Comeau would see the emergence of the most modern, most profitable, and most reliable paper mill in terms of supply. The world is important, so to speak, as long as you do a young, large one. It's the best investment you can make in terms of basic economic return. Our project will be better spent on building a paper mill with 2 paper machines. A paper mill is a paper machine. It's something that produces continuously, 24 hours a day. We'll have 2 paper machines. It's a large mill, one of the largest in Quebec. At the time, it was obviously the most modern one, just built. We're putting in every imaginable innovation. These are people who already had a mill in Ontario, who knew the business, and who are going to build a very fine mill that will last a long time, one of the most efficient mills in Quebec. It was 20 to 25 years later that we started modernizing it, and above all, adding a 4th machine. Today, it's much bigger. It's a big change, but the basic technology was very good. On Christmas Eve, 1937, the mill produced its first roll of newsprint. A few weeks later, in February, the first shipment left the port of Baie Comeau bound for New York, but Cormick had just one. His unclear, possibly by reading the documents, we realized that he preferred a good company town, but there was a simple fear. It's somewhat understandable if you're completely isolated. If there's a strike, you're doomed, and the unclear, possibly they're going to die, to do the work, to make unclear, possibly the work, and the good weather. Then you have to remember in the United States, even in Quebec up until the 1930s, a strike could easily turn violent, which created a kind of fear, a bit of panic, saying we'd go through the checkpoints because not just anyone could disembark, let alone see. I remember disembarking in April 1938. We went through police lines to disembark some people. My father was there to welcome us. We had the house. Not just anyone could disembark, or even build a house. Finally, but when it was accepted that it would be an open city, meaning there would be a city council, but since it was a city owned by a single company, obviously the mayor, as if by chance, a body of the company, the budget, the company's budget, and decisions made by both the city and the company. It was going well. You deny ownership, how before it became open, it takes things like that. There were privileges, precisely, that I didn't have. I wanted to have an interest, but they said, no, sir, you don't work for the company. If you needed to work for the company, you could buy a family home, buy the house in Montigny. That's true. The first house you bought was used there. Yes, when you didn't work for the colonel, you couldn't live here and own the land, so they sold it to whomever they wanted. Despite the company's control over all aspects of the new town's activities, the workers don't complain. Social life is vibrant. Young families are settling in this new El Dorado. The Ontario paper, now Quebec, knows the recipe for keeping its people in this beautiful part of the world. It was well equipped. We had a mini Côte la Reine. The colonel and the bishop get along well, and they have a deep respect for each other. In some ways, they are similar in their responsibilities to men as well as in their roles. I was the driver, my lord, the shelter. There was some wood that spilled from the flame, but I told my lord has a James. The bishop replied, "Excuse me, David wouldn't be a hydraulic conveyor, would he?" He learned in French that day, unless it was always in the town department. I heated etc. for the students. We were very lucky because from the minute we arrived, they were hired. Since the days of the comedian, things have changed a lot. With its aluminum smelter, Baie Comeau is no longer a single industry town. The old houses and the manor, rebuilt in the 1960s after its fire, retain a touch of nostalgia. The large murals recall a past deeply rooted in the present. We had pretty much the same creative center as it existed back then. You had rooms with tables for a large living room. You had a library. From a cultural point of view, it's unbelievable. There were concerts here. International artists, I remember, including a certain pianist. There wasn't even a state in Quebec City. They came to give concerts, but as we isolated ourselves there to request it, there were artists from an international friend. There were activities, let's say sporting ones, for the cause of the Chicago player, but the Sainte Amélie Church, named after the colonel's first wife. It still stands on the side of the dry mountain, overlooking the indentations of the bay and the stretching coastline. There lies a veritable treasure trove of immense frescoes, painted by the Italian master Guido Nili. His works, donated to the church by the Meme couple during the town's construction, are now part of the national heritage. He finished the 45th work, a worrying task. If the frescoes aren't able to withstand sunlight to control the humidity, because frescoes, well, you don't know what they are water-based paints applied to wet skin. Today, the church is renowned worldwide. It's second largest in North America. Much more discreet, the small Anglican church, Street Andrew and Street George, also hides a true treasure bequeathed by a work that reveals a rather surprising side of the seemingly austere man that was McCormick, a small temple that testifies in its own way to an extraordinary friendship between one of the most powerful men of his time and a humble indigenous man from the North Shore. When the world sees this, it's unique, it's exceptional. It features many animals from the lower North Shore: moose, salmon, Canada geese, an eagle, a wolf, a bear. This stained glass window is itself a history book, whose hero, a mountain man from the coast, is said to have saved the colonel's life when he had become lost in the forest. Many people think it was Joseph, but no, it was T-Bass who saved McCormick's life, but who decided to commemorate T-Bass's life in that stained glass window. When we think of the church, when we think of it, we also think of T-Bass, because they are twinned. There is a very strong bond. There is this desire for the world to remember his contribution. Not just T-Bass, but the Montagnais who were there to guide him in his explorations. A true friendship developed between the two men from such different worlds. From 1915 onward, Macor and his friend T-Bass traveled the territory, exploring the Shea Bay concession in the village that would become the town of Port Cartier. The story of the wealthy American and the humble Native American continues to intrigue, but for him, it was the man who had saved his life, and he was a formidable guide. First, he knew the town like the back of his hand, and he always had a deep respect for him. The colonel admired the wisdom and resourcefulness of the Native American guide. It's hard to say which of the two was more impressed in the other's presence. At McCormick's invitation, the mountain man even went to Chicago, where he was received with great fanfare in the prestigious newspaper's building. He spoke. He never spoke. There was a pause that was always like that. Similarly, with every word, so he had eaten like that. Similarly, on plates, it was the supple one who presented the plate. It had impressed him enormously. Visionary, conservative, financier of the toughest school, but Cornish was neither angel nor demon in his work. The creation of Baie Comeau responded above all to capitalist imperatives. His greatest merit was daring to create a city in the midst of an economic crisis in an isolated region. practically cut off from the rest of the world. But that's how he was. The colonel remembered people had respect for his employees. He was a man like that, a humane man, a bit paternalistic. Yes, a bit paternalistic. Alice, he was passing by somewhere, but here, then saw an employee stop, give him his hand, who knew his first name. He was very conservative, as was his approach, by the way. For him, the newspaper was precisely, it was the #1 organ of individual thought, of American success, of citizenship. And then, among his many donations, there was one for one, things about American thought, and those who arrived, I remember the manager, followed first by water because, but as for who was searching, not bad for him. He was Char, he wasn't from Chicago. There's no good regard, walking around, then bringing by French. He spoke French quite well. I remember there was a reception at the manor, and everyone spoke only French, and some English people were insulted by it. He said, "You do as I do, speak French. I have this French place." Often, the impression was that it wasn't just a bay window, but it was for him. It was one concern among thousands or hundreds, but there were some involved in the construction of the city. It touched him deeply. I heard there was a model at the time, and that it followed the work. There's a side to it. Failed engineer. He was an extremely gracious man. He measured me, at least, if that's what you mean by foot, holding his head high. He was a great joy, a giant, a visionary. I was very happy.